Like I made so many mistakes just trying to be adapting, the textbook styles of like Western leaderships that didn't quite fit, just trying to figure out like, who am I in this game?
Welcome to Proudly Asian, a podcast series that tells bold and proud stories of Asians by Asians. My name is Isabel, your podcast host, and I'm here to find stories that challenge biases we face every day. There's never just one way to look at Asians. This podcast will take you through a deep dive into the life stories, struggles, and triumphs of young Asians around the world. On today's episode, we have Satomi Ogata, a Japanese neuroinclusive workplace consultant and leadership coach with over 15 years of global HR experience across the United Nations and US tech companies. Diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia in adulthood, Satomi talks about how to create a neuroinclusive workplace and the business case of inclusivity. Welcome back to Proudly Asian. Now, it's October time. For our long-time listeners, you would know that it's time for us to have some conversations around mental health. And for some of you who might know that October is also a month where some major markets in the world would observe Dyslexia Awareness Month and also ADHD Awareness Month. So for this episode, I am so glad to be bringing in a guest who is an expert in creating inclusive workspaces due to her global HR experience and also her personal experience being diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD later in life. So without further ado, let's bring in Satomi, who is joining us from...
Today I'm in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. I just got here yesterday from Singapore.
Amazing. So I'm so glad that you are joining us on Proudly Asian because we sort of spoke to each other a few months ago when you so graciously reached out to me and said that you were a fan of the podcast. I'm so glad to finally meet you and have you on the podcast. And later on, I realized just how you had this amazing career in global HR with the UN and also some US tech companies. So this episode is all about you telling us what's going on in the D&I space, how to create an inclusive workspace. I'm sure you have a lot to share. But before we get into that conversation for our listeners to get to know a bit more about you, why don't we get started with the basics? Tell us about your background. Who are you? What are you? And where did you grow up, Satomi?
Yeah, I love that questions. And, as Isabel kindly said it, that I have been a huge fan of your show, probably from the episode 2, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow.
So first adapter. But just to give you visual descriptions, that I'm a Japanese woman in my late 30s and wearing in black dress with a pink and green floral prints and the medium long hair. Who am I? So the professional front that I'm a founder of Beyond Bias is Asia's first HR consultancy specialized in a neuroinclusion workplace created by the HR for the HR. And I launched this company in April after global HR career in the United Nations. And also that got me back to this part of the region from Denmark about 2 weeks ago. And my mission is really to, help organizations design culturally attuned neuroinclusive workplace throughout of the employee life cycle. And at the personal front, and it probably just explains as why that I started this Beyond Bias, is because that I'm a late neurodivergent in my late 30s. after experiencing Q burnouts and repeatedly, I got diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and was given the pills that didn't work and didn't really sit well with me. So I took a plunge, and last year that I finally received my formal diagnosis of ADHD, and that absolutely changed everything. And later that I can talk about a bit more. Yeah, what else? So I'm a Japanese, but also grew up in Australia, therefore my accent, I guess. And I have also lived in Singapore for 10 years and Denmark for about 4.5 years. And now I'm in the KL.
Wow. So you went on a whole global journey and coming back to Asia to continue your mission and your startup that you just mentioned. You've lived in Japan, Australia, Singapore, Denmark, all very different cultural settings.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, other than, your language abilities, your accents, how did each place shape the way that you see yourself as an Asian female professional? And what were some of the hardest adaptations you had to make in these places?
Yeah, definitely that each culture that I've lived through helped to shape me, who I am and probably who I am going to be in the future as well. And it's also not many people knows about this, but not only I lived in those countries, but my parents accidentally put me in a Jewish South African school in Australia as well. So I think that's another story to share. But there's the one thing that I can say from the professional front, working in the UN, definitely really deep in my perspectives. And I met so many incredible, Asian leaders globally. And they're the common patterns that I'm seeing, and including myself as well, that people are quietly, share that we struggle with how to shape our global leadership style and fighting with our own stigma as to what would be the stereotype of, the Asian leadership from the external point of views to how we want to shape our global leadership. So just give an example would be like I made so many mistakes just trying to be adopting, the textbook styles of like Western leaderships that didn't quite fit. And also just trying to figure out who am I in this game? And who do I want to be known as? Because of my Japanese upbringing and a background that gave me the opportunity to be able to read the room instead of being individualistic in Europe. So I find myself not speaking up in a meeting where that I should have been because that I was waiting for the queue or I was waiting to collect those, the feedbacks from everyone. And I think that's also like one of my struggle that I would say that because of that, I have grew up and lived in different multicultural contexts. So I can be quite adaptable and I call myself as culture chameleon. But at the same time, because of that I do admit that I lose my own belief, values, and the leadership styles and my own voices. But I would say that, and this is something that is my based on perspectives, a lot of Asian global leaders, in my opinions, that we provide a lot of future leadership skills that is needed in this world more than ever. And that means the ability to be able to read a room and also emotional intelligence, listen to people and to bring the people together collectively. And I think that's something that is like future leadership skills that we need in this world when we're narrowing so much gaps in the globalizations. So that's something that I work with leaders in order to reshape, how we want to frame Asian leadership in a global setting as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
And
could completely relate to the point, especially when you mentioned how, for people who are kind of like brought up in a multicultural setting, for example, third culture kids or people who have grown up in multiple places, they just eventually became very aware of different cultural settings, the expectations or the unspoken rules in different
yeah,
markets, right? And at times in the professional world, it could be quite paralyzing because you are just aware of so many different sets of cultural expectations to the point that you're not even sure, oh, which one should I practice today? Is it the
yeah,
Asian rules, the Western rules? Should I be more Western? Should I be more Asian? And just because you spend so much time being in conflict, thinking about which cultural rules or like setup that you should adapt to, like it kind of makes it so hard for you to just develop your own professional identity because either way that you choose to adopt, you can see how the other side might have criticisms or might think, oh, this is not the way to go. So you end up just debating yourself so many times, all the time.
yep.
As you mentioned, the workforces are also becoming more global. Another way to sort of think about this or reframe this is that, being aware of so many cultural expectations is indeed a superpower or a quality that's needed for future leadership, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Because one size don't fit all. And, I think that a curiosity in the leadership is something that is so disregarded these days, but it's the most essential skills and also that are active listening skills. So it's no longer about that who speaks the loudest. It's about listening, active listening to understand like what people think and how they behave in order to align the leadership with the people that you lead. That is the attributes that I were looking for in the leaderships. And I do believe that, the many of Asian people that are who works in a fight in the global setting that are, they do have that awareness. It's
Mm-hmm.
just that we need to tweak how we can elevate up to that leadership framework.
Yeah. Cultural awareness is definitely increasingly becoming an attribute that's desired in global leadership. But Satomi, going back to you personally, of course,
Yep.
you mentioned during the introduction you were diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia later in life. So I'm
Yeah.
just wondering, did it change the way that you understood yourself? Did it provide any sort of clarity, answers, both personally and professionally?
Oh my gosh, yes. The short answer would be absolutely yes. And I have two layers of histories to that. So just to give it a background, but I think that looking back, that getting diagnosis with ADHD last year was my real turning point for me. And actually, it was dyslexia that I was diagnosed about 5 years ago. And I remember that was like between my previous job and going back to university. And I just couldn't answer some of the questions in entry exam because of like that something that involved with like a pattern recognition and all that. I just couldn't do it. And that should not be penalized my intelligence in human resource management work. So I spoke with the university and I mentioned that, my teacher back in the days that taught me that I might be dyslexia, but I haven't got the formal diagnosis. And they were just like, okay, well, you need to get the formal diagnosis with, educational psychologist. Otherwise, that we can't accommodate you. So I just went quickly to educational psychologist in Singapore 5 years ago, and I went through some, diagnostic criteria, and it was confirmed that I was dyslexia. But I remember my educational psychologist told me, and hopefully he's not listening, or maybe he is. He was like, "You only have 7 days to go through this exam. There's no way that you can pass this." Then I was like, "Okay, I'll take that as a challenge and watch me." So I did study quite hard. And I ended up not only admitted to the school, but it's also got the scholarship. And I stuck it to his face.
Oh, wow.
But this was the thing, like, I only knew how to compensate my what I thought that I was flow as working hard,
Mm-hmm.
like putting more hours, like learning in a way that it didn't work for me, but constantly competing in a setting that was very disadvantaged for me. And the only way that I've learned was working twice harder than anyone else.
Yeah.
So no wonder that I got repeated burnout. Then because that I thought that I was my flow, and no one really taught me, um how to kind of like do it a different way. And I also ignored that as well. So 5 years later, and when I got my another burnout, and I was also being a HR training those inclusive recruitments, and I was like, I don't really know many thing about what people can ask for accommodations. And also that with my ADHD diagnosis, that got me the label that I didn't want initially. But now that I have a label that I know how to name it, so I have access to how to tame and ability to learn what works for my brain and then move forward. And throughout of that process, I also became a neurodivergent coach because I was like, well, why don't I just kill two birds with one stone? So I did, and I started to learn different things. And it's actually a lot of accommodations or the workplace adjustment. It's so simple. It doesn't cost anything, but no one is there to really teach you on operationally what the workplace and people can do. And as a HR and being a HR trainer, why do I do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you actually made a really good point because the diagnosis of ADHD, dyslexia, or any sort of conditions, it does not mean admitting defeat. It's in a way for you and for anyone who were diagnosed with these conditions to sort of understand where you would tend to have challenges, acknowledge that and come up with workarounds so you can still achieve your goals, right? So
Yeah.
I mean, obviously I would like to get to know more about, some of the strategies or actionable steps that different companies can adopt to sort of cater to this part of the workforce. But I mean, let's
Yeah.
go back to your career journey, right? Because you had an amazing career in HR with the UN and some US tech companies. So I'm just curious, like, what are some of the key lessons that you've learned, or like key observations that you've made in these workplaces, even? Or were there any stories that you could tell us about your
Yeah.
burnout?
Yeah. So I'll break it down to maybe the first one that are key highlights and lessons that I personally learned throughout of my journey as a HR, especially in this part of the region in Asia. First lesson that I've learned is, the Western led leaderships often miss the mark in Asia. And probably about 6, 7 years ago that I was delivering some training, and it just did not make sense in this part of the region. But because I worked in the I worked in the US software company, and I spoke with a global learning and development manager back then, and he was like, "Well, this is pretty much in a global, so you can jazz it up, but you're the trainer, so you need to follow what we provide." And I was just like, "But this is not something that works in this part of the region." And I'll give you the specific example of that. It's like a speak up campaign. The leaders asking the teammates to speak up and be confrontational. That does not work. And that's not how, we deal with things, or constructive feedback. And I was like, okay, well, this cannot be continued. Like, we need to understand, if we want to deliver well-intended program, we need to meet the reality of who are we dealing with and what workplace that we are delivering the trainings for. And I just thought that it was so simple, but it wasn't. And that goes to probably the second lesson as well, that because of that is well intended, the programs such as like, diversity, equity, inclusion, empowering women's and all that, it just stops at inspirations and even move the needle of aspirations, but not so much on the walk the talk. And I think that the third thing that I've learned from frustration of the HR was a lot of advocacy, that adding more problems when the HR is actually firefighting every day on a different topics, or so it's just the things, just problem over problem that it wasn't really solving. And I saw that about disability inclusion trainings at the many training that I had opportunity to take, and no practical HR things was actually given. Yeah, so that's also the gap that I saw it, and I was like, okay, well, I have two choices. Do I want to go back to the corporate or going to another UN agency, and it'd be bitter about, those frustrations that I see as a gap in the patterns, or do I want to be better about it and to create my own framework and the workshops and the training, and especially with advancing neuroinclusions in Asia Pacific, which is something that is not many people talks about, or the little that people understand.
Yeah, I'm curious about neuroinclusion because I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. This is a topic that is sort of still emerging in Western societies, and of course, understandably, in Asian societies, this concept might be non-existent, unfortunately, for a lot of societies currently. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, like, where are we at in terms of neuroinclusion conversations in the corporate world or in global workforces? Like, can you tell us the current state of play on that front?
Yeah. Yeah, I was at the conference 2 days ago. It was run by international labor organizations, and I was very lucky that I got invited in. And definitely, the conversation in Asia Pacific is advancing as compared to what it used to be. Probably 10 years ago, that I was non-existent, but still, in my perspective, like when people talks about disability, is immediately people ties with visible disability, and which is understandable for sure, and it's important. at the same time, when we look at, entire whole spectrums of disability, is around more than 70, if not 80% of disabilities are considered as invisible disabilities. And these are the conversations that it didn't happen, and it's still very much taboo or stigmatized in some part of the region in Asia. But because of the social media, because of the people's awareness, companies are not able to ignore, and also that the law in Asia Pacific are fast advancing. And some of the concern and opportunity, I guess, is that because of the legal requirements are advancing quite rapidly in Asia. So that is something that companies also do need to pay attention to. And because of that we can have more awareness. But oftentimes that when people talk about workplace adjustment or accommodation, it often falls in a conversation with two things. One is office workspace, like, those the headrails and, the visible things, the barrier-free environment. And the second thing is assistive technology. So assistive technology that helps to boost up the productivities and also, the readability and also the hearing and all that as assistive technologies. And what we're not talking more about is how are we actually communicating that in a workplace? And what are the utilizations of Asia, the people who wants to adopt that? Because culturally, we also have that. Well, I can certainly share from my perspective as being a Japanese, nail that sticks out to get hammered. So asking for, reasonable accommodation or workplace adjustments, it still feels like preferential treatment that is deeply rooted in my culture and a background that I grew up, and that's how the community shows up growing up.
When we move on to, exploring some actionable steps that companies can adopt, I mean, first of all, I'm just thinking about from like a day-to-day perspective for leaders who become aware that maybe their team members might be diagnosed with a certain conditions, let's say autism, ADHD, or dyslexia. How can they even approach that conversation, or should they be proactively approaching that conversation? Because obviously you can't just come in to your team member and be like, hey, I heard you have autism. That's not the way to do it, right?
No. Oh God, please don't.
So how can they really do that talk?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And that's where the neuroinclusion comes in the picture. So neuroinclusion it's about universal workplace design. So it's about how can people work at a best for everybody and not just neurodivergent. We're not segregating people into the box, right? Quite often that a lot of diversity, equity, inclusion program that I have witnessed is about focusing on one marginalized community. And what happened is which are needed, don't get me wrong, at the same time that when you spotlight one group, there's always that there's the people who are excluded on that group are not going to be happy. So it creates another exclusion in a certain, area. And I'll just give you a specific example of what I'm trying to say is that I've seen, especially in Asia Pacific, the company focus on empowering women. and which absolutely I'm all up for that. And but some company practice in a way that women needs a flexible working schedule. But is it really just the women that who needs a flexible working schedule? And I can see your face going like that. So I think we're aligned as well. But what about men? Like, men also has some duty of care with their children. And
Mm-hmm.
also, what about in East Asia where we are expected to, you know, care for Asian parents? So, and, the men, like in Japan, traditionally, elder son are responsible for taking care of Asian parents. So, don't those people need flexible work schedules too? So, why are we constantly spotlighting and segregating to different? Because everyone should deserve flexible working schedule and make it that as a universal.
Yeah, and the right way to, if they have to come up with a label, right? I do know some workplaces have already started doing that. That would be primary caregiver, regardless of the gender.
Yep.
And it's so true as well. I mean, from a women's perspective, if they automatically assume women being the primary caregivers, it's also kind of confirming the biases or the misconceptions around women's role in family and in the workplace as well.
Yep, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. And my next question for you is like going back to the neuroinclusion topic. I mean, from your perspective, what would be the best practices that some companies can adopt to create a neuroinclusive workplace? Any examples that you could share with us? I remember last time we chatted as well, you mentioned even in the job recruitment phase, like in during interviews, there are also some techniques that HR professionals can adopt to make the interviews a little bit more inclusive.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many things. And again, a lot of things that I consult with organization doesn't cost anything. And also as a HR and working with, business leaders, I know that, the moral conversations doesn't move the needle. So what I provide is definitely the win-win. And I can give you a huge example, especially with the interview, because we have like interviews on a Zoom or, sort of virtual setting quite often. And we work in diverse team in Asia or the global, right? So that means that we have a different accent. And so why don't we just show the interview questions on the screen while the interviewer is actually talking? And what happened and why that this matters is that, seeing in the question first reduce the anxiety. It supports the focus. It reduces the cognitive taxing and also remove the language bias, and candidate can really focus on what questions to be asked so they can reply what has been asked. It's like watching a movie, right? Some people prefer to watch movie with English subtitle even though you're a native speaker. It's just a different preference. But for this scenario, why is it a win-win for the employers is because of it's a repetitive process. So as an HR, that we always have, few questions at least is consistent across every interview or every candidate that we interview. So making that question visible, every candidate knows what is the selection criteria or the interview criteria, and the interview can stay consistent. And Because of that, you reduce the bias, and also that hiring decisions are easy to defend in case
Mm-hmm.
that anything happens from the legal front.
Yeah.
And it only takes 5 minutes to prepare, and you can recycle.
Yeah, it echoes what you mentioned, right? For a lot of these techniques, accommodations, a lot of times they don't require huge investments, a large amount of time. And for the interview scenario that you just mentioned, it really depends on the purpose of that specific round of interview as well. Like, are you trying to test a candidate's technical knowledge, get to know that candidate a little better, or really to test how quickly they can think? Then, if it's the first two reasons, then maybe it could allow some flexibility for the accommodations that you just mentioned by displaying the questions, so it could reduce the anxiety factor for the candidates to perform the best, right? So that would be
Yeah.
more from a recruitment perspective. But let's move on to the next phase, where sort of people managers, right? For people managers who are handling team members with neurodivergent conditions, what do they need to be more aware of, or how can they sort of make slight adjustments to the day-to-day work to make it more inclusive for their team members?
One of the things that I've started to, advocate for why that a neuro-inclusive is important is that when we look at the Asia Pacific, and it's also the globally as well, getting a diagnosis is already a privileged place.
Yeah.
And I can tell you from, dyslexia, ADHD, and autism, 80% of people, as an estimate, that are diagnosed with the condition after age of 18. The ADHD, recently, the research came out, I was like 31 for the women, because we don't fit into stereotype criteria that they have, which is like can't sit still and running around in a circle at the, those like a naughty little boy in a primary school. Girls don't show up in that way, especially in Asia, right? So, neuro-inclusive, it removes the need of disclosing, and company doesn't have to, nor the HR or the manager should be asking back questions,
Mm.
because no one is going to come up and say, well, I am, and I need this and this and that. Maybe that there are people in
Yeah.
younger generations, but certainly from the times that I grew up, and given the fact that I've interviewed more than 1,000 people, I only had one person that I asked for accommodations in the 15 years of my HR career in this part of the region. And the person was in Australia, and she had access to early intervention of being ADHD. So she knew exactly what other area that she needs assistance with. When I got diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD, I had no idea what area that I was masking.
Mm.
And I was put on the stage of, okay, well, tell us what you need. I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I was like, I don't know where exactly I was masking. So I'm
Could you
trying to figure it
elaborate the
out.
concept? Could you elaborate the concept of masking for our listeners who might not be totally aware of what that means?
Yeah, so the masking can be just at a workplace that you're not fully at yourself, and even though you're not okay, but you just smile and a wave.
Mm. from what I've read in some literature, like masking could be the simplest way to put it is like to act like a normal human being, but they would kind of have to play a very active role in it to remind themselves to, well, this will be a good time for you to act this way. And so they would put on like a front that will kind of enable them to look, talk, or sound like a normal, so-called normal individual, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is just for our listeners who are like, oh, masking, what
Yeah.
does that mean? I mean, this is just a little context for you guys. But I mean, to
Yeah.
carry on the conversation with Satomi, obviously, what I love how you mentioned the ideal case scenario for the workplaces would be that no one has to declare their conditions for the
Mm-hmm.
workplaces to sort of accommodate to their needs and to be inclusive, right? But obviously, the reality is we're not there yet,
Yes.
especially in Asian societies. So, obviously many Asian organizations, they still have that slightly older leadership that struggles to understand the concept of neurodiversity because it did not exist when they first entered the workforce. So
Yep.
how would you, let's say, for example, if you are working with such organizations, right? How would you convince the decision makers from these slightly older generations who may not get it? How would you help them understand?
Yeah. Um, that's something that I'm constantly being challenged, and also I try to bring as much as evidence base
Hmm.
and not theoretical framework and abstract concept, because that was the problem in many times, including myself, that I struggle to put the abstract into executionable HR strategy. So trying to make it as simple as possible and share about what are their bottom line. And I can give you an example. When I speak with the business leader, I focus on the business risk and the return on investment. And it's not a charity, it's about business strategies. And what I mean by that is, as I mentioned, that a legal requirement is tightening up everywhere in Asia Pacific. So one's mishap can trigger a lot of reputational damage. And also the ESG compliance is also evolving in this part of the region. So before that, investors is going to question, how are you making sure that you are providing an inclusive workplace, which it's not enough. And usually that's where the conversation stops, right?
Mm.
But because that I am HR background, so I talk about attrition rates.
Yeah.
So it's about how many people has resigned due to whatever the reason. Do we have a data on what was the reason that a people resigned and left? And what are the cost implications? Because recruitment is expensive. There's a lot of hidden cost. When you lose one person, not only you just lost the one person, but you lost from a lot of different operational expenses point of view, and also the ramp up period of a new person coming in. And these are the things that is like you can monetize. So I look up like those conversations with business leaders about, okay, so you have about 20% of attrition rates, and span of people staying is this amount. Is this something that is hitting you as in a workplace?
Mm-hmm.
What if there's a way that we can reduce? And this is what I recommend. It's about, what is your psychological safety? How do you measure that? And And these are the solutions that we can provide, because we need to understand the whole employee life cycle. Another thing that I would talk about is about every companies these days that we're talking about, the AI. It's like a rat race, right? About AI this, AI that. And it is not going anywhere, right? AI is evolving constantly, and so does workplace needs to evolve, and so does human skills that needs to evolve. And every organizations and every position, there are certain human skills that is required, that are creative thinking, strong communications, interpersonal skills, adaptability and resilience, and ability to recognize the pattern and to be able to solve the complex problems. These are very skills that neurodivergent minds that excels. But the caveat is only when workplace can design and adjust to the different support that is needed for people to thrive and not survive. So, yeah,
Yeah,
I try to play different cards.
Well, I guess in your position, you will have to, just given the stakeholders that you are managing on a day to day basis, and they all speak very different sets of languages, right? But one very important tip that you just shared with us is like to convince business leaders who are from the older generations, like speaking their language, talking business, and making it easy for them to adopt are potentially the easiest ways for them to get their buy-in. But I mean, my other question for you, Satomi, is that now
Yeah.
let's say you manage to convince the business leaders, right, and they would like to get serious about being truly inclusive, not the tick box exercises.
Yeah.
What would be the first step that you suggest them to take?
Whew. Okay. um,
There could be a million first steps.
yeah. Um, I would say that what are other people's understanding when it comes to psychological safety
Mm.
in the workplace? And the reason why I focus on that is I believe that anything that you want to build, and imagine that you're in a city, that one that has a good pillar of foundations, and you have a high-rise building, and the other city that, they may cheated that foundational process and they build high-rise empire very quickly. And when earthquakes happen, which city that stays and which city that goes down. And the way that I look at the psychological safety is that the pillar of foundations. And quite oftentimes that we're not getting right about psychological safety. Like you ask 10 people and they will come back with different interpretations, right? And it's not about that. It's not about that you're it's not about like the people can just say whatever that they want and whenever they want. That's not psychological safety. But that's quite often how some people think, because that we're not really being educated. What does it mean and how do they show up in the workplace? Because every workplace has a different culture. It's an organizational culture. So have we actually sat through and came up with a universal understanding on what, like when people say about what is a psychological safety, how did that show up?
Yep.
That's the number one thing now.
Like,
And that's where that I can start helping because then that you can understand, okay, well, where are we based on the scale of where do we want to be or aspire to be to the reality. Then we can plan holistically, what can we do in order to get there? Is it from 3 to 10 or is that 6 to 10? We don't know. If we don't know.
Yes. I mean, I agree. Like what you mentioned, to get everyone up to speed with that definition of psychological safety or any kinds of inclusive priorities that the organization would like to adopt is a very important first step. Like everyone has to be on the same page regarding the language, the definitions, and like you mentioned, having that honest conversation about, you know, acknowledging where they are. If they are in a very bad situation, let's be honest with it, and where they want to be, right? I think honesty is key in this very initial process of moving the organization forward to try to build a culture that they want to be known for, right? That will enable their workforces to continue to succeed. So those are very practical tips that you just shared with us. And Satomi, now it's time for us to move on to the next segment, which is called Rapid Bias. Now,
I love this one.
I know, it's everyone's favorite segment. It's mine too. So for this segment, I will be asking my guests biased questions that they've got asked at some points in life. And for Satomi's case, it could be biases about your conditions or even the kind of work that you do. So are you ready, Satomi?
If I say no, can I?
If you say no, I will. What would you suggest me to do? Like, should I accommodate and cancel the segment for this episode?
No.
I am just joking.
I know, and I love this segment. Like, I think that some of the episodes that I just like religiously listen to this because it's just so funny.
I know. It's like for those lazy bums who don't want to listen to the whole episode, if you want to skip the entire episode, just don't skip Rapid Bias.
Yeah. Okay. I'll try to be as witty as I can.
There's no expectation. I'm just glad you are here. So for the first question, isn't everyone a little bit of ADHD or autism these days? Ooh, that's actually one that I've heard quite a lot.
Yep.
Or like the other way they ask this is kind of like, isn't everyone on the spectrum or something like that, right?
Oh yeah. And including some of the advocates that I have spoken to. So I would say, well, sure, like everyone's a little bit of left-handed, right? So are you okay to pick up the pen and chopsticks on a left-handed when you're right-handed?
And the next question, Satomi, neurodiversity is a trend. Isn't it just another label?
Yeah, and the trends fade, but my neurodevelopment condition is a lifelong and I can't switch it off. So if anyone knows how to switch it off, please come and see me.
I love it. And question number 3. Isn't asking for accommodations just making excuses, receiving preferential treatment?
Yeah, like I would put the same analogy. Only if giving a left-handed scissors counts as preferential treatment and favoritism, sure.
And next up, you don't look and sound Japanese, or you don't act like a typical Japanese woman.
Oh yeah, I get that every single day and everywhere. And to the point that many years I didn't even bother to say that I was Japanese. Because I was like, Yeah, like we have about 126 million people in the world. So which version am I not fitting to you?
Right. Yeah. I mean, what is a typical Japanese woman supposed to look and sound like?
I can do
And
this.
oh dear. Maybe what they were referring to was like, wow, you talk. You don't act like a Japanese woman. Because the stereotype is always like Japanese people are quiet, right?
Yeah. And another thing is like, oh my god, your English is so good. And are you sure you're Japanese? You don't, like, your skin's too dark. Like, I don't have that bangs on my hair. I'm like, sure. Would you like to see my passport?
Wow. Just fascinating to learn what people think Japanese people look or sound like.
Yes.
And last question for you in this rapid fire segment, Satomi. Are you here because of your partner or husband?
Yes. I had that quite a lot. And I go where my curiosity takes me.
Yeah.
And that could have been because of my partner or the husband or my career, or I'm just curious about the different culture. Yeah,
Absolutely.
depends.
Yep. Well, that wraps up our rapid fire segment. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And for us to close out the episode, Satomi, I'm going to ask you a completely different question, which will go into the music department. So for our Proudly Asian playlist on Spotify that we invite all of our listeners and guests to contribute to, is there a song that you would like to add to our playlist?
Yes. So I don't listen to many Japanese songs, but they're the one artist that I absolutely love, and her name is Ado, ADO. She's quite famous internationally, and I actually saw her in live in one of the biggest stadiums that they have in Copenhagen too. This is how big she is, and she's only 22 or 23.
Wow.
And she's the faceless person. So she doesn't show her face.
Wow. I'm
And
Googling it now.
She's always in the cage when she performs. And my favorite song from her is Show, which is something like a pick me up, kind of like a shower song for me, that I dance in the shower and sing.
Amazing.
So yeah.
Wow. Okay, I can't wait to check it out. We're going to add that to the playlist. And for those who would like to check out our playlist, you can also check out our episode description, and we'll have a link to our Proudly Asian Spotify playlist. And
Yeah, I'm going to add that too.
Yes, please.
Yes.
And play it everywhere you go.
I will. I needed my new shower phones too.
Oh, yeah. Yes. And so, Tammy, finally, last question for you on this episode. What does it mean to be proudly Asian and neurodivergent to you?
Ooh. Yeah, that's a very, very good question. To be who I am without apologizing, that's number one. And like I said, that I feel that I'm in a very privileged positions of someone that who is open about my conditions, in order for people in Asia to also, come to. I'm not expecting anyone to coming out, because that's their journey and they shouldn't be forced. But I do hope that my story can, help them to be more proud of being Asian and being neurodivergent.
Absolutely. That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Satomi. And I would just like to leverage this occasion to remind everyone who are wondering about their conditions. If you do decide to seek diagnosis in the end, just know that it's not admitting defeat, but it's just a process of getting to know yourself better, understand where could be challenging for you, and to work out some strategies to work around that so you can also succeed in life and achieve the same goals as everyone else around you. Thank you so much, Satomi.
And thank you, Isabel, for having me. And if I could just say that one more sentence that I like to leave is that, no one should be blamed on how their brain works.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
That's a great reminder for us to close out this episode. Thank you so much, Satomi. I'm so glad we finally did this episode.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much for having me.
That's it for this episode of Proudly Asian. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at proudly.asian for more content. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Leave us a 5-star review on wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in and signing off for now. I'm Isabel Wong.